In the small town of Cedar Hollow, Oregon, a 92-year-old grandmother is about to make a notorious motorcycle gang tremble in an unforgettable lesson. Evelyn Brooks, with her silver hair and deliberate gait, appears at first glance to be nothing more than an ordinary elderly lady. Yet the Crimson Talons made a fatal mistake when they harassed her at the local general store. What this brutal gang didn't know was that this gentle grandmother had once been a legendary medevac pilot in the Korean War, flying over 150 rescue missions under enemy fire. When their threats crossed the line, Evelyn needed only a single phone call to summon the squad of veterans who once owed her their lives. Can a small town rise up against the darkness? And how can one grandmother change the fate of an entire community? All right, my dear audience, stay tuned for the story that will leave you speechless. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see viewers joining us from around the world. Evelyn Brooks pushed open the glass door of the little corner grocery in Cedar Hollow. The bell's familiar jingle rang out, woven into the fabric of daily life. Mr. Frank's modest shop always offered her a sense of comfort. Crusty loaves of bread, neatly folded morning papers on the shelf, and a few quiet greetings exchanged among the town's older residents. She moved slowly, not from frailty but from calculated purpose, a habit honed in her military years. Her silver hair tied neatly at the nape, a light gray sweater draped over her buttoned-up blouse. Everything about her spoke of disciplined strength, silent yet unyielding. Evelyn required no assistance. She chose a long loaf of bread with her own hands. She smoothed each page of the newspaper before folding it, and she placed them on the counter. But the morning's gentle calm shattered with the harsh roar of motorcycle engines on the main street. The air shifted instantly. Everyone in the shop fell silent. Mr. Frank frowned, arms crossed behind the counter, eyes fixed on the door. The door flung open. 5 or 6 men strode in, leather jackets, heavy-soled boots, tattoos spreading like blood across necks, arms, temples. Leading them was a hulking figure with eyes like steel. Gideon. He didn't need to shout. A single crooked smile was enough to drop the temperature a few degrees. "Protection fee," he said, curt and blunt, tapping the counter as if ordering in a cheap diner. Mr. Frank tried to steady his voice, but the tremor in his eyes betrayed him. "I paid last week," he said. Gideon tilted his head, like a wolf sniffing out fear. "Price went up," he replied. Then he turned to his men with a mocking laugh, arrogance dripping from every word. At that moment, Evelyn dropped the loaf, not from fear, but from a wrist twinge. An old wound flaring up. The bread rolled across the tile floor, a tiny sound, but to Gideon, it was an opening. He spun around, eyes narrowing in contempt. "Look at her," he sneered, pointing at Evelyn. "An old hag still out buying bread." The gang erupted in laughter, as though witnessing a sideshow. Evelyn bent slowly, retrieved the bread without hurry. She stood, turned deliberately, eyes clear and unwavering, locking onto his condescension. No anger, no fear, only a chill precision that made Gideon falter. "Choose your enemies more carefully," she said, voice low, unhurried, but ringing out in the silent shop, an unspoken command. Gideon arched an eyebrow, forced a hollow laugh, tinged with uneasy surprise. Something in her gaze unsettled him. He shook his head, dismissing the moment. "What did you say?" He spat, as if disbelieving an old lady dared to challenge him in broad daylight. Evelyn offered no reply. She slipped her hand into her sweater, produced an old cell phone. No rush. She dialed each number as if calling a dear friend, and in her mind, he was more than a comrade. He was a life she had once saved under enemy fire in Kandahar. The phone rang twice. A deep voice answered. No one in the shop caught the words, but Evelyn's two quiet syllables, "It's time," were a coded signal. No further explanation needed. She hung up, slipped the phone back into her pocket, adjusted her collar, and met Mr. Frank's gaze, her eyes saying, "All is well." Gideon stood frozen. Inexplicably, the atmosphere had shifted. No one in the shop looked at him with fear any longer. Even Mr. Frank, who had just trembled, now stood a little taller. Gideon snorted, waved his men forward. "Let's move," he said, but the swagger was gone, replaced by an unidentifiable caution. As the engines receded into the distance, Evelyn returned to the counter, paid as usual. Mr. Frank began to speak, but she simply laid a hand over his, a gentle squeeze, like a signal that trust was returning. That silent call to arms, invisible to the world, was the first shot of a new battle. She knew it well. Cedar Hollow had endured enough. It was time to reclaim it, not with weapons, but with clear minds, sharp strategy, and bonds long forgotten, honor, loyalty, and ancient promises. This war did not begin with a bang. It began with a look, a word, and a phone call. Evelyn was ready. Gideon, however, had no idea he had just knocked on the quiet door of a veteran and awakened a storm that never truly died. Less than an hour after that call, a distant roar rumbled down Cedar Hollow's main street like thunder striking the pavement. This was not the chaotic rev of the Crimson Talon's bikes. This time, the sound was steady, deliberate, carrying a weight that stole every breath. Each thundering pulse felt like the heavy footfall of history, returning to claim its place. 60 roaring motorcycles curved into the town center without a single howl or ostentatious display. Only the disciplined silence of warriors accustomed to brushing past death. They had fought in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and the Middle East. Each rider bore an indelible mark, in steely eyes, in discreet scars on wrists or temples, in a posture as straight as a ramrod, despite the burden of years on their shoulders. They wore black leather vests, bristling with military insignia, each badge a chapter of memory, a vow never forgotten. Leading them was Iron Nate, Nathan Caldwell, once commander of hundreds amid enemy fire, now standing before Cedar Hollow as a living emblem of an unvanquished past. His salt and pepper hair swept back, his face unreadable, his gaze sharp as an old blade retaining its edge through every battle. Under the silent cover of 60 veterans, Iron Nate strode toward Frank's grocery. The door stood open, the air inside thick with tension. The Crimson Talons still prowled, encircling Mr. Frank like vultures stalking weak prey. Gideon, chin raised, hand on his hip as if checking a holster, stood at the front. But when his eyes met Iron Nate's silhouette, the smug curl of his lips faltered. Iron Nate made no move. He merely stood, arms hanging by his sides, needing neither threats nor demonstrations of force. His presence alone, heavy and wordless, froze everyone in place. The veterans behind him held their ground like an unshakable wall. None shouted. Everything that needed saying was etched on their faces. "We have defended far greater causes, and we will do so again." Gideon's grin vanished. He squinted, scanning the ranks as if weighing odds. Time slowed, every second compressing the silent tension. Finally, he took a step back, then another. Without orders, his men understood. They withdrew, quietly, bitterly. Not a word of protest, but their hearts lay heavy. The crimson talons departed like a black cloud torn apart by sudden light. Yet Evelyn Brooks understood. This was merely the overture. Their retreat did not signal fear, but the need to regroup. Next time, they would not come alone. That evening, the town hall brimmed with an unprecedented crowd. Many still wore their uniforms, shop aprons, gas station coveralls, factory coats. No one needed prompting. All were present. Evelyn stood before them, her silver hair neatly tied, voice calm but clear. She recounted every detail, no embellishments, no omissions. Each sentence struck like a nail scraping open doors of truth long padlocked by fear. And when she paused, the hall fell silent, not in terror, but in listening that reached deep into every soul. A hand shot up, then another. Craftsmen, farmers, shopkeepers, nurses, teachers. They rose in agreement. No more bowed heads, no more turning a blind eye. No one would draw their curtains early again for fear of sounds they could not control. At dawn, veterans and townsfolk established patrol posts town-wide. They formed small teams, taking shifts. Some posts used old radios to communicate. Others marked risk zones on hand-drawn maps. Those untrained in arms learned to watch and signal. Evelyn remained at headquarters, orchestrating deployments and gathering field reports. Cedar Hollow transformed swiftly, no longer passive or resigned. Each alley, shopfront, and entrance gained silent sentinels. The people began to believe they were not alone. Behind them stood a cadre who once risked their lives on distant fronts, and returned not for rest, but to protect home once more. The veterans' arrival was more than a warning to the Crimson Talons. It was a silent declaration by a community once subdued, that they would rise, that they would not let fear reign another night. And beneath the pale glow of that twilight meeting, the first spark of hope ignited in every Cedar Hollow heart, deep and undeniable, like a promise that could never be revoked. The Crimson Talons were not accustomed to being ignored, nor would they tolerate a challenge, and they did not wait long to retaliate. That night, Cedar Hollow awoke as if shaken from its peaceful slumber. Clara's little coffee shop was set ablaze. Flames roared to life, consuming the porch where patrons once read quietly, where children laughed over steaming mugs of cocoa. Soon after, Tom's repair garage was vandalized, window panes shattered, tools scattered across oil-stained concrete. These were two of the few brave souls who had refused their protection fee. The fire cast blurred patches of light across the town's darkness. It shone directly into long-suppressed fears. Yet the most terrifying thing was not the blaze itself. It was that people saw that light and wondered what tomorrow might bring. From a distance, Evelyn Brooks watched the ruins. She spoke not a word. She simply observed, as if purposefully memorizing each charred fragment. Her heart felt heavy, not only from sorrow, but because a part of her had foreseen this very moment. Evelyn would not answer fire with fire. She would not repay rage with rage. The next morning, she sent out a single message: an emergency meeting at the church. No coercion, no shouting, yet everyone came. They needed answers. They needed direction. Inside that small church, where wooden pews still seemed to echo whispered prayers, Evelyn stood tall, her gaze unwavering. She was more than a veteran of distant battlefields. She was the living memory of resilience, and today she was the spark to reignite Cedar Hollow's spirit. She did not inflame them. She did not paint a picture of hatred. Instead, she laid bare the enemy's true nature. The Crimson Talons were more than a gang of thugs. They ran a sophisticated drug network, using Cedar Hollow as a transit hub, hiding their operations behind protection fees and threats. Evelyn knew she could not confront an organized system without a clear plan. Violence would only spill more blood. What Cedar Hollow needed was justice, enduring and irreversible. And she was not alone. Sophia Reyes, a former military intelligence officer, quietly stepped forward. Drawing on her experience in behavioral analysis and signal tracking, Sophia helped establish a covert surveillance system. They hid cameras in shop signage, planted recording devices at the gas station, and deployed stealth drones to monitor the routes the gang frequented. Every piece of data gathered was precious, not just footage of exchanges, but snippets of conversation, glimpses of unusual actions, and from those fragments, a clearer picture emerged. Just as everything seemed to be falling into place, Evelyn uncovered something she could barely accept. A mole within the town council, someone she had once trusted. This person was silently feeding information to Gideon, the Crimson Talons leader. Something inside Evelyn shattered, not from surprise, but from the betrayal's source, the one place that should have been safest. Yet she refused to let emotion dictate her actions. Rather than expose the mole without proof, she chose a long game. Covert surveillance, using old trust as a shield. The plan demanded patience and secrecy, bordering on cold calculation. But Evelyn understood. To save the town, she could not afford a rash reaction. She did not take the quick route. She chose the right one. Together with Sophia, the veterans began training residents to recognize risks, to protect themselves and their businesses. They built an underground network of lookouts, sharing information through simple signals hung outside homes, a silent language only insiders could read. Evelyn urged everyone not to flee, not to capitulate. Every business that stayed open was a statement of resistance. Every household that maintained normalcy was a declaration. Cedar Hollow would not yield. As trust returned, fearful glances gave way to steady resolve. They did not need more weapons. They needed the truth. And Evelyn, like a steadfast architect, was silently rebuilding the framework of a once shattered town. The Crimson Talons might possess guns, money, and brutality, but Evelyn wielded what they did not. A community's unity forged in shared pain, and above all, she had time, strategy, and the belief that Cedar Hollow would rise again, not by force of arms, but by the power of justice. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or sip a glass of water, then settle in, because the story still holds unexpected twists. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from every corner of the globe. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story, so we can continue bringing you even more great tales. Gideon began to feel his seat grow unstable. The presence of the veterans unit was more than an annoyance. It was a direct threat. It robbed him of sleep on nights that had once been peaceful. He understood all too well. Their discipline and combat experience were more terrifying than any gunfire, and for a man like Gideon, the greatest fear was losing control. In a desperate, reckless move, he reached out to a notorious Nevada drug cartel. These were people who cared nothing for human life. They sought only profit. It wasn't long before black SUVs began to slip into Cedar Hollow's outskirts. Their engines purred like stalking cats. No horns, no dust, only a deadly hush that carried an undercurrent of unease. At their head marched Leonard Voss, a former army officer with eyes of cold steel, once known as the man who left no trace. Voss spoke little. He needed no shouting to command attention, no threats to cultivate fear. His silence was a stone wall that rebuffed any resistance. Within the first week, Voss established a network of sniper positions around town. He set up safe houses at strategic points: the west intersection, the alley beside the repair shop, the abandoned warehouse by the railway. Each location morphed into a tactical maze. No one in town could move without entering their sight. In a small house on the town's edge, Evelyn Brooks sat silent before her surveillance monitors. Under the pale glow of a desk lamp, her face looked carved from stone. Every movement of the SUVs, every stealthy footstep on rooftops, every terse signal Voss sent to his men, she saw it all, clear as day. Evelyn was no longer acting solely for Cedar Hollow. She saw something larger now. Gideon was no longer a lone predator. He had become a puppet in the hands of a greater force. Forces capable of turning the entire town into a chessboard. Human lives reduced to mere pawns. She knew time was running out. This game had entered an irreversible phase. Every misstep now could cost lives. She summoned the veterans. Not a harsh word was spoken. A look conveyed everything. They needed no further explanation. They understood. This battle was no longer just Cedar Hollow's. It was a critical link in a federal crime network that someone had to break. Strategy was charted in silence. They began to pull back patrols, not out of fear, but to deceive. Gideon needed a taste of victory, the overconfidence that would make him reveal himself. And, as anticipated, he relaxed. He allowed larger shipments through, convinced Cedar Hollow was subdued. But Evelyn was not fooled. She worked covertly with Sheriff Alvarez, a former Marine, a man of few words, but eyes that reflected the clarity of someone who had witnessed too much loss. He and Evelyn formed a second front: information. By controlling the leak from the mole in the town council, they deliberately fed false intelligence, bogus operation plans, phantom retreat routes, figures calculated to lure the enemy into traps. The Crimson Talons and their mercenaries believed they were gaining the upper hand, but every move they made, from load pickups to transport vehicles to stash locations, lay exposed in Sophia Reyes's surveillance system. Every clip of footage, every recorded snippet, every line of data was carefully encrypted and forwarded to unexpected destinations. Evelyn did not gamble on luck. She bet on intellect and faith. Not only faith in herself, but faith in the community, in the awakening of people who once thought themselves too powerless to effect change. She knew this enemy was not merely men in leather jackets wielding pistols. It was an entire system operating in the shadows, where human beings were measured by profit and power. But Evelyn also knew that light always finds a path, provided someone braves to hold the lamp. The war continued, but now it was no longer a reactive defense. It was a proactive overthrow, not with blood, but with evidence, not with bullets, but with strategy, not with hatred, but with justice. And Evelyn, the silver-haired woman with eyes as sharp as steel, sat silent before her monitors, ever watchful, ever planning. She knew that to truly liberate Cedar Hollow, she must strike at the roots of darkness, and she was ready, step by determined step, to see it through, to the end. That night, there was no moon, only an eerie silence, as if the entire town held its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Evelyn Brooks sensed it, not just by instinct, but by the steely calm of someone who once held another's life in her hands with a single decision. Voss had given the order. The attack was meticulously planned, and the target was none other than Evelyn, the spiritual heart of Cedar Hollow. He didn't need to kill her, only make her vanish. Then, the town would descend into chaos. The resolve of its people would shatter. That was their plan. But Evelyn knew. She had known for days, and she had prepared. She chose not to hide, not to flee. At the stroke of midnight, she walked alone into the central square. Each footfall echoed on the empty cobblestones, as if challenging the darkness that cloaked her. No weapon, no armor, only the quiet presence of someone with nothing left to lose, and unwilling to let anyone take away what remained. The mercenaries spotted her immediately. A silent signal went out. They moved in to encircle her without a sound. From rooftops, from shadowed corners, they tightened their ring, but they did not realize that every step they took, every position they chose, had already been accounted for by Evelyn. From hidden vantage points, the veterans closed in. Men who had served on distant battlefields, who had survived ambushes and traps, now stood ready in silence for the final stand to protect the place they called home. Voss watched from afar. His gaze was cold as stone on the square. Gideon stood beside him, his face contorted by tension, yet forcing a hollow grin. The grin of a man telling himself he still controlled the situation, but they did not know that the decisive moment no longer belonged to them. At that instant, every street light in Cedar Hollow went dark. For a heartbeat, the night swallowed everything, and then the headlights of the veterans' trucks flared to life in unison. Beams of light sliced through the blackness, exposing every hiding place. This light revealed not only the mercenaries, but the fear etched on their faces. Before the enemy could react, the DEA, summoned earlier by Sophia, raided the safe houses. They did more than arrest. They seized an entire cache of drugs and weapons, linking that evidence to a web of federal crimes. Evelyn remained motionless in the square's center, like an unyielding pillar. No one dared train a gun on her. No one dared step forward. She uttered not a sound, yet her silence spoke loudest amid the chaos. But Gideon refused to yield. In desperation, he charged toward the truck he had covertly rigged as a rolling bomb. His hand fumbled for the detonator switch. He no longer cared about the town. He only wanted to drag everyone down with him. A final, despairing move by a man who had lost everything. Then, a shot rang out. Not from the DEA, not from the veterans, but from Elias, the one who had been Gideon's most loyal right hand. Today, he chose differently. His bullet struck Gideon's arm, sending the detonator clattering to the ground. Elias's eyes no longer held obedience, only pain and regret. The square fell silent. Voss, still watching from afar, understood. It was over. No more blood needed, nothing left to salvage. No expression, no resistance. He ordered his men to surrender. One by one, the mercenaries dropped their weapons. Not a word was spoken. The battle had been decided, not by force of arms, but by strategy, by clarity, and by faith. Gideon was taken into custody. The mercenaries were handcuffed. The crimson talons dissolved like ink washed away. Cedar Hollow stood in silent victory, not flamboyant, not grandiose, but profound to the bone. Evelyn quietly walked toward her car without looking back. She knew what had been saved. More than that, she understood this victory did not come from mightier weapons, but from unwavering resolve, from the faith she had kept all along, that within every human, even those seemingly beyond redemption, there remains a spark of good if someone persists in kindling it. The war had ended, but within Evelyn's heart, something still lived on. not fear, but a new, unquenchable belief that when people stand together, no force can tear them apart. A year has passed since that fateful night. Cedar Hollow has donned a new guise, serene, resilient, no longer burdened by the smoldering fear that once cloaked it. Streets, once deserted in trembling silence, now hum with laughter and conversation. Yet the greatest transformation is not in the scenery, but in the hearts of its people. The old warehouse, long abandoned and riddled with decay, now stands as a community hub. The Veterans Unit transformed it into a place of opportunity. Here, they offer vocational training, guiding those who once stumbled to learn how to begin again. Former criminals, once cast aside, are now heard, redeemed, and encouraged to live with dignity. Elias is one such example. The man who once shouldered a gang's gun now uses his hands to fit new roofing on Clara's coffee shop. The place that was once reduced to ashes now buzzes like a station of hope. Fresh wooden tables, black and white photos on the walls capturing moments when the town rose up. The café has become a symbol, not only for its intoxicating aroma, but for hands that once did wrong, now striving to do right. Leonard Voss, upon completing his prison term, sent an unexpected letter. No excuses, no justifications, only an apology and a plea to be given a chance to atone. Evelyn read that letter in silence over and over. She offered no immediate reply, but weeks later, when he stood at the community center gate, she simply studied him for a long moment. Then, in a warm, concise tone, she accepted, not forgiving, but granting opportunity. Sheriff Alvarez, now working closely with federal authorities, has made Cedar Hollow a national model for criminal rehabilitation and community reintegration. On roads once battle lines, patrols now march, veterans and former gang members alike, each wearing jackets branded Cedar Hollow Unity. Evelyn, now 93, still sits in Tom's old repair shop's corner. She speaks little, she simply observes. She watches children chase each other down the sidewalk. She watches once lost souls now bow in greeting. This is not easy peace. It is peace earned, purchased with trust, patience, and unconditional compassion. Evelyn's legacy does not dwell in news reports or medals. It lives every day in the way her neighbors treat one another, in the relief shining in a mother's eyes as her son, once astray, earns honest work. It reminds us that true power does not arise from authority or arms, but from the capacity to change human hearts. Thank you for journeying with us. Don't forget to tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see viewers joining us from every corner of the globe. Comment 1 if you've enjoyed the story, so we can continue bringing you even more great tales.